Hello and welcome to another timeless video. Today we're trying out this blue, black and red or Grixis colored Death Shadow deck. So one of our key cards is a 1 mana 13/13 getting -X/-X, where X is our life total. So we're not going to want to play Death Shadow unless we're at 12 or less life, otherwise it's simply going to die on the spot. But once we get it in play, we can quickly grow it thanks to all the fetch and shock lands in our mana base and the other life loss effects. So we can very quickly get a huge creature for just 1 mana. And then Aether Drift also introduced the Last Ride, which is quite similar to a Death Shadow. Instead of being a creature, it's a vehicle. So the upside here is that we can play it on turn 1, and even though it still gets -X/-X, where X is our life total, we simply don't crew it until we get below that threshold. And then in the meantime, we can also pay 3 mana and 2 life to draw a card, so that can also kind of enable its own ability. And then taking a look at some other cards, of course, we're going to have some cheap interaction like Thoughtseize, which also costs us 2 life, so that's perfect alongside Death Shadow. And then I'm also playing the Reanimate package as another 1 mana card that can lose us a lot of life at once, so we can quickly deploy our Death Shadow and the Last Ride. And then Reanimate plays very well with Grief, as we can maybe pitch a black card, take away a card from the opponent's hand, and then Reanimate Grief at the cost of 4 life to once again bring it back and take another card out of the opponent's hand. So we do need a very high density of black cards if we want to reliably evoke the Grief when needed, and that's also part of the reason why I didn't find room for Brainstorm in this deck, which is normally a card you would consider in a blue deck that has access to all these fetch lands to shuffle away cards you put back on top. And then we also have a one-off copy of Surgical Extraction, which we can also cast by paying 2 life, so that can be a way to extract a key card out of the opponent's deck, maybe after we make them discard it with Thoughtseize or Grief, and that can be another way to lower our own life total as well. And then I don't have Fatal Push as removal, but I do have a one-off Dismember, which can also pay 4 life and 1 mana to give a creature -5/-5 until end of turn, as opposed to paying 1 and double black, so that can be another way to speedrun lowering your own life total for Death Shadow. And then because we're playing Reanimate, we already have Grief as something exciting to bring back. Occasionally the opponent will have a creature we can make them discard and reanimate, but I wanted another high impact card to reanimate, and that's where Abhorrent Oculus will come in handy as a 5/5 that lets us manifest Dread each turn, so that can single-handedly win the game. And besides trying to hardcast it by exiling 6 cards from our graveyard as an additional cost, thanks to the many fetch lands and other cheap cantrips, we would much rather discard it with either Fear of Missing Out or a Psychic Frog, and then reanimate it back for just 1 mana and 3 life. So Fear of Missing Out can help set up the Oculus, and we can easily enable Delirium as well, at which point we can maybe get an additional attack step with a Death Shadow or maybe an Oculus. And then Psychic Frog, another way we can discard Oculus from our hand, and it's also still a black card we can pitch to Grief if needed. And then Temur Battle Rage is how Death Shadow often tries to beat other creature matchups, because the problem with Death Shadow is that your life total is going to be quite low, so if you're up against other creatures, it's going to be tricky to get an attack in without dying on the way back. The opponent can easily chump block a large Death Shadow, so now Temur Battle Rage giving Double Strike and Trample can potentially present a one-hit KO if you're attacking with a 10-powered Double Striking Trampling Death Shadow. And then rounding out the deck, we also have Stubborn Denial as a counterspell that also plays well with a large Death Shadow or maybe an Oculus, as we can just cast it for 1 mana as a negate pretty much. And then Mishra's Bauble, another cheap way to fill the graveyard for Delirium and for Oculus, and can also combine it with our fetch lands to look at our top card. If we don't like it, we can just shuffle it away with our fetch lands. And speaking of fetch lands, these are also very important to lower our own life total. Can sacrifice them at the cost of 1 life, and then fetch up a shock land like a Watery Grave, which will enter untapped at the cost of 2 life. So we can just pay 3 life just by playing our land, basically. So that's how we can quickly lower our life total as well, especially when combined with cards like Thoughtseize and Reanimate. And then we also have a one-off basic in case we need to play around Blood Moon. So yeah, that's our deck. Now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Alright, we're on the draw. Our hand is lacking interaction, so this may not go very well. Do have a lot of threats. If our opponent has a disruption-heavy hand, then this could work out. With double Death Shadow, Reanimates, good against opposing Griefs as well. So maybe it's worth a shot, but if our opponent's on a combo deck, this is not going to work out well. Turn 1 Sewers, And Teachings is usually played in Charbelcher combo decks, but those don't have any other lands like the Sewers, so this might be more of a show and tell combo deck instead. For now, bobble myself, so if I don't like my top card I can shuffle it away. Thoughtseize I'm definitely going to keep. And then I can surveil afterwards with Sewers, although with triple Death Shadow in hand I probably want to deal myself as much damage as possible. Start with Thoughtseize, can maybe bobble the opponent now. So if I fetch Shock twice and Thoughtseize, I'll be at 12, so I can play a Death Shadow, which is probably what I'll do. They're drawing Flooded Strands. And opponent actually has Veil of Summer in hand, and they are a show and tell combo deck with Atraxa in hand already. Well, we could just reanimate Atraxa here. Although, how do we beat show and tell for Hullbreaker Horror? If I go for Hullbreaker, what happens? Then I'm not necessarily doing much afterwards, but yeah, I guess going for Atraxa's fine. We might draw into Grief that I can then play for free to take away show and tell or Hullbreaker. So I need black-red, and it's kind of fun to try this. And then I'll be at 5 life, so we can play some pretty beefy Death Shadows. Did not find Grief, so that's potentially a concern. I'll take instant, artifacts, sorcery, lands, and then I guess Oculus as my creature. Discard 2 cards. Can discard Oculus to reanimate, which still doesn't quite kill me. And yeah, Death Shadow is probably better than the last ride at this point. And draw another Death Shadow. Well, 4 of a kind. Can it beat Hullbreaker Horror? I guess I also could have kept Oculus in hand to put in play through the opponent's show and tell. Although at this point Death Shadow is probably more impactful. Do have to watch out with Atraxa's lifelink as well, that we don't shrink our own Death Shadow, so there's actually a lot of layers to this. They could show and tell with Veil of Summer backup as well. So I'll put in... Does a land do anything for me? Not really. So Death Shadow. So then they're not going for Veil of Summer, but they can bounce with Chromox to bounce Atraxa back. I guess they can still Veil of Summer thanks to Atraxa making green. Alright. But now Death Shadow at least is not going to shrink, and we can cast a whole bunch of them. So step 1 attack. Probably gonna fetch basic Swamp. And then may as well fetch now. This has been one wild game, and it's not over yet. Play Death Shadow. Play Death Shadow. Play Death Shadow. Here we go. If they can cast enough spells to bounce all 3 of them, I'm dead. So our opponent cycles Veil of Summer. Bouncing 1 back. Let's see if we're dead. Alright, we get to untap. So, step 1, turn the team sideways, and take it from there. Nothing I can really do before attackers that would make a difference. Don't think they can gain life at instant speed, where I would need to grow Death Shadow, plus I can always dismember to grow them at instant speed. So Teachings, trigger Horror, bounce 1 of them, jump another, still take 9. Alright, and we get there. Awesome, on to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw, and yeah, I've got to try this. Double Death Shadow, won't be able to play them until a little bit later, but Thoughtseize helps. So I can fetch, shock, Thoughtseize, or just Watery Grave for now. Opponent might be on a Charbelcher combo deck. And we see the Balustrade Spy instead, so they are a similar deck still, but they've got 2 win conditions. So we'll take the Spy. And then it's just about trying to close out the game as quickly as possible now, before our opponent finds another one, or a Charbelcher. So could keep up Stubborn Denial to keep up interaction for a Charbelcher, but they wouldn't necessarily be able to play it next turn, and I think it's worth it to try and get the Psychic Frog down. So we can maybe draw some extra cards. If we draw Reanimate, I can discard Oculus and bring it back. So that's a pretty fast clock. Opponent casts the Ghoul. I guess that can get in the way of our Psychic Frog. Unless we want to Team or Battle Rage to give it double strike. I guess I would have to discard some cards for Trample as well. Although that may be worth it, in all honesty. So, step 1, probably attack. Opponent blocks. I'm going to discard 3 cards. I might draw into another land, so I could discard the one I have. Or I could just ditch Double Death Shadow and then ride the Psychic Frog to victory. It's a close call, since we do get to draw 2 cards, but I'll feel silly if I don't get to cast Denial and our opponent casts a Charbelcher next turn. Although being able to drop a Death Shadow would be nice too. So maybe actually ditch the Stubborn Denial and then just go Battle Rage, play land, cast Death Shadow. Find a Grief, that's now an option too. Well, I think I still Death Shadow here. Although next turn we can hit for 5 and then 5 again, so it's a 2-turn clock. If their last card happens to be another Spy, I'll regret it. But I think I do Death Shadow here. That way next turn I can potentially attack for lethal already. Since I can fetch, shock, and then we're at 10 damage. Opponent's got a Charbelcher, so that's fine. Would have been able to counter it with a Denial, but now we're just attacking for lethal. So that also works. Take my turn, and another Battle Rage is kind of the cherry on top. So fetch, shock. And this is a 12 damage attack from Death Shadow alone. Could discard another card to the Psychic Frog, but yeah, that's gonna be good enough. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play. We have Thoughtseize plus Surgical to maybe shred apart combo decks with Stubborn Denial as more interaction. Although we are missing a threat, so we're nowhere close to applying pressure here. I'll still give it a try and hope we're not up against a creature deck. And then turn 1, I'll just start with Thoughtseize. Can maybe save my fetch land in case we draw Mishra's Bauble. And yeah, that does look like a graveyard combo deck. So I can take the Breach and then Surgical it, although I can wait a turn. And Surgical does not replace the card that gets removed from their hand. So, take my draw. Another land. Can maybe fetch Sewers to Surveil. And then I'm not in a hurry to Surgical yet, since they're not going to cast Breach unless they start with Dark Ritual. Opponent kept on top. I could also Surgical now just to kind of make them shuffle, which I don't hate. And then I'll pay a black mana. since our life total could matter. Ooh, opponent's got a Necro in hand. Alright, so take the Breach. So they're a Tendrils Storm deck, basically. Alright. And yeah, if they had something like a Ragavan on top, that could have been a nuisance. But yeah, Necro. Hopefully we can counter. Demonic Tutor will let resolve. If I draw a black card, I can also grief. For now, I'll fetch my Sewers. Swamp I definitely don't need. And a Watery Grave, so we are flooding pretty badly. Opponent played Mountain. I guess they need Dark Ritual to get enough black for Necro, but then I wouldn't be able to Stubborn Denial. So, would have worked out better if they didn't have the Mountain. And our opponent just needs to rely on their creatures to win the game, since they don't have Breach. But yeah, they might be able to. Their opponent draws a bunch. I'll be conservative with my life total, so I'm not gonna fetch Shock end of turn. Next turn we can just cast Grief, take their best card. Okay. We know they can Unholy Heat. And then their hand is Ritual, Tendrils, Intent. And then I probably have to take Ragavan. So they can still deal some damage here with a Ritual and a Tendrils. They cannot cast a Diabolic Intent. But they're probably just gonna find more cards with Necro. Maybe find more Dark Rituals to just storm off. But yeah, without Breach it's a lot more difficult. So finding Oculus could be good here as a quick win condition. Opponent is not going to have Delirium, since their cards are now getting exiled. Fear of Missing Out, can discard a land. Don't have many fetchable lands left for Scalding Tarn. And then a Last Ride could be decent. I'll just play the Blood Grip tapped. Possible we'll end up drawing with the ability, so then our life total is a valuable resource. Plus we of course know about Tendrils. Channeler can set up their Intent. And a Thoughtseize. So I may as well let that resolve so they lose 2 life, as opposed to trying to counter. Opponent's at 5, so they can still Ritual into Tendrils. Also didn't want to cast the Denial and increase their storm count even more. Unholy Heat, so this is without Delirium, so they're just hoping to get lucky with the Surveil. And they found Artifacts, wow. So that's probably what's going to make the difference this game. Although they're also just kind of winning with Tendrils and Necro. Our Last Ride is getting bigger. And Channeler, I guess, could still block. Their opponent's just hoping to find 1 more Tendrils to close out the game. Is there anything I can draw here? I guess Fear of Missing Out into her removal spell. Dismember would do it. And Grief is actually not bad here. Can cast it, crew the last ride, maybe take a Tendrils, and then force them to chump to lose Channeler. But they might have multiple win conditions in hand. So what do we see? I guess with Supplier and Diabolic Intent they can get another Tendrils. That's a lot of chump blockers for the last ride as well. So yeah, I guess did we see Lightning Bolt earlier? I wasn't really paying attention. So I should probably take the Intent. And then I'm not quite sure how we're gonna beat all these random creatures unless we maybe draw Temur Battle Rage. Either way, we'll crew the last ride. And yeah, Channeler can still block, normally is forced to attack. So you don't see it blocking very often. But the game goes on. Word that to Tendrils off the top. And Channeler can also close it out next turn, so yeah, Temur Battle Rage is what we need. Vermin mills me. Ooh, there's a Battle Rage. There's one left in the deck. But we also wouldn't have drawn it for turn. Opponent stays at 1 life. And they're gonna Bolt Face, so they did have Lightning Bolt in the deck. Alright, on to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw. A one-lander is always going to be rough. This one also doesn't get close to really casting the Oculus. So I'll mulligan. This one we can try. So are we pitching Grief to then reanimate it? I guess we are. Opponent brainstorms to hide their best cards. Pretty effective here in response. And see Supreme Verdict, another Brainstorm Chromox. No shuffle effect, but they might have that one on top. Supreme Verdict is definitely the most annoying card long term. Could also take the Brainstorm and then next turn Grief with Reanimate. Although they might have drawn into a counterspell by then. Because our plan involves Oculus surviving for a while and Supreme Verdict is a perfect answer. So maybe I do just take the Verdict now. And then the Brainstorm as well. And then if they drew a counterspell, it's going to be sitting in hand for a while. Fear of Missing Out's a good draw. I think I'm discarding a land over Oculus, since we're not too far from hardcasting it. And draw Stubborn Denial. Don't quite have Ferocious enabled, but we're getting there. Alright, hit you for 5. If they do eventually find another Verdict, I won't be able to counter it, so... but we would be able to follow up with an Oculus, which is pretty good. End of turn, I'll Surveil. And another Oculus can go. Bobble gets Delirium. And we can cast Oculus now as well. Probably should have looked at the opponent's deck here, since I don't have a way to manipulate my own. We know there's a land coming up at least. Start by attacking. Opponent can block with Anchorage on the Fear. That would be acceptable. So now they don't have a counterspell up for Oculus. And it feels like if they had a Verdict, they would have cast one last turn already, although that's not a guarantee. But I'll take my chances. Leave another Oculus in graveyard, in case we draw Reanimates, or I could leave an extra type for Delirium purposes, although we know we're gonna get rid of a land here. So we're gonna get close to Delirium again pretty quickly. Possible they have a Swords to Plowshares in hand, so then if Oculus gets exiled, I'll still have another one to reanimate. We'll see. So first we want to manifest, and then we'll draw off Bobble. And then I guess we have instant probably going to the graveyard soon enough. And this way we also hide the fact that we're playing with Stubborn Denial. Alright, please don't Verdict me. Alright, we get to untap, and now we have Stubborn Denial for interaction. So adding a land doesn't get me to Delirium. Turn the team sideways. And that'll do it. Awesome. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw. Our hand seems keepable. We've got the Death Shadow plus Battle Rage. Rage also good with the Psychic Frog. Just need to lower our own life total first. And we're gonna get griefed. Opponent pitching a Thoughtseize. I imagine Stubborn Denial is probably gonna get taken. Yep. And can they reanimate Grief? Not yet. So we'll start with Bobble on ourselves, even though we could get more info from the opponent's deck. They're gonna shuffle end of turn anyways. Well, they're shuffling now. I could still Bobble them, but if I Bobble myself, I can decide whether or not to fetch it away, which seems more relevant than just a little bit of info when I don't have any real interaction anyways. Opponent's gonna Surveil. Okay. And a Fear I don't mind drawing. Still wanna deal myself some damage, I think, for Death Shadow. And we can maybe bluff having another Stubborn, but then I cannot play Watery Grave. So, yeah, it's a little awkward here. I guess I'll just play an untapped Blood Crypt and pass. Could have also played the fetch lands with a plan of drawing off Bobble first, and then I can fetch the Surveil land, or just keep the fetch land available. Opponent brainstorms. So, blue-black. And the Thoughtseize. Could go for Psychic Frog if they don't have removal for it. Takes a Fear. Alright, I could Grief pitching Shadow and then try and ride this Psychic Frog to victory. That might be worth it. I see. So Sorin trying to cheat out Saint Elenda. Well, they can keep their Elenda in hand. Play Frog. And hope they don't draw an answer to it. Sometimes the Sorin decks are also merged with the Charbelcher deck. Opponent's gonna try and take away Temur Battle Rage, so may as well discard it myself. They're not escalating, so they're hanging on to Saint Elenda instead of maybe discarding it to try and reanimate it. So Brutality sees Bloodstain Mire. Not sure what else they're doing here. And then we've got all our hopes riding on a silly little Psychic Frog. If we draw Oculus, we can cast it by fetching. And yeah, maybe I'll attack first, because if we don't draw Oculus, I can just get to Surveil land instead. And Grief I'm not gonna be casting here. So yeah, get to Sewers end of turn. And a Polluted Delta can go. Step 1 attack with Frog. Do I discard a lane to it? Maybe it's time I do, to speed up our clock a little bit. Draw Death Shadow, so that could be large. Could still cast Grief, although I'll regret it if our opponent top decks Reanimate. Although it's possible their other card I can still take away if it's another Sorin. So then it might be worth it to Grief. Fetch Shock. And it was a Show and Tell, alright, I see. So they've got multiple avenues to cheat out Saint Elenda, and our opponent scoops it up. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play. We've got our last ride. Thoughtseize, Fetch lands and Shock lands, and Reanimate can also lower our own life total. What I'm missing is something exciting to reanimate, but maybe our opponent has a creature we can get back. So we'll try it. Ooh, a Leyline of Sanctity. Well, there goes that plan. Can always Thoughtseize myself, but that's not particularly exciting. So I guess I'll just cast my last ride here. So this might be Show and Tell combo. I'll play my Frog. And my own life total is not going to matter too much. So we want to lower it for the last ride. So now my best hope is finding Stubborn Denial to interact. As our opponent assembles their combo. Yeah, Leyline, not always a main deck card, but in some matchups it's quite backbreaking. As it is here. As we find another Reanimate. So, attack. Might be time to start discarding some of these useless cards like Thoughtseize, even though I can still Thoughtseize myself, as I said. I'll hang on to one Reanimate in case I draw Oculus. Another Frog I can play. But I could be dead to Show and Tell. Let's find out. Yep. Put in Omniscience. And I imagine there's going to be an Atraxa soon. Impulse, so they're still digging. So there's still a chance that they can't quite go the distance. Another Impulse. So they are seeing a lot of cards. Reveal, draw 3. So yeah, it's not looking good here. Sleight of Hand. And there's Atraxa, so that's probably game over. Finds Fae of Wishes, which can get their sideboard win condition like approach. So yeah, a Leyline definitely got it done, otherwise we had a decent amount of disruption. If they did have an Atraxa in hand, we could maybe Thoughtseize it and then reanimate it, but yeah, that's not happening. So approach, assemble, cast approach, and that's game. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw with a keepable hand. Can bobble myself, either fetch or play basic to Thoughtseize. Fear discards Oculus, and then take it from there. Opponent with Chromox, 3 cards left. Surgical could be effective. So we'll start with bobble. Look at our top card. Battle Rage is definitely not something I need right this second. So then I can get a red-black and Thoughtseize. Opponent's gonna brainstorm to hide their best cards here, so I don't expect them to shuffle with the Polluted Delta afterwards. But we can force them to shuffle with the Surgical Extraction. And yeah, how about we take Show and Tell and then just Surgical now. I guess I could wait until their draw step, although that could backfire if they draw into some counterspell. And just extract the Show and Tell now. And our opponent concedes, I'll take it. So we get to see our Timeless Death Shadow deck in action, and there's a lot of ways we can approach this archetype, and it feels like we've barely scratched the surface here. The Last Ride, maybe not the most impressive card, but the fact that we can play it on turn 1 is pretty useful compared to a Death Shadow being stuck in hand for a while, which is where maybe cards like Street Wraith in future expansions, maybe as a special guest, would go a long way in improving the archetype, as a way we can pay 2 life to draw a card, to quickly lower our own life total to get the Death Shadow in play. And then there's other cards we could consider for the archetype. Maybe we can try a build with Dark Ritual and the various Necro enchantments that can aggressively pay life, so we can get a huge Death Shadow in play while having a lot of extra cards to work with. That could be another approach, maybe ends up being mono black instead. But yeah, this hybrid approach with discard outlets and Oculus seem to have its own strengths as well, so we're not all in on a Death Shadow if we cannot get our life total down fast enough, or if we're up against a matchup where we can't afford to lose too much life. So yeah, it's a deck that can be tinkered with some more. Also wanted to maybe try Snapcaster Mage as a creature that can get back interaction out of the graveyard while still being a way to crew the Last Ride. That was a consideration, but then it felt like the deck didn't have enough win conditions without Oculus, and Oculus and Snapcaster are a little bit at odds. So yeah, it's definitely something I can keep working on, but hopefully future expansions will give us more tools to work with. But for now, I want to thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed, and as always, have a nice day.